I'm Susan Moore, President of Friends of the Salmon River. Welcome to our show tonight. Tonight's presentation will be Backyard Birds with Kyle Blaney. This is now the 5th event in this year's Winter Speaker Series. And again, Friends of the Salmon River is partnered with Friends of the Napanee River. And the slide switch. Can you switch the slides? Tonight, we are actually using a new format, so I'll just tell you about it. We are using something called the webinar style rather than the old meeting style, which is what we previously used. And this new one is loaned to us from Queen's University. Many thanks to Queen's staff for their coaching help. This webinar style is a more professional style of Zoom, and it's designed for larger audiences. As you can see, like we have tonight, we're up to 233 participants now. And with this new one, it allows no background noise or video interruptions. You will notice that attendees do not now show up on the screen and are always muted. However, we do still want to hear from you. So if you have any questions during the session, please, as usual, use the Zoom chat function to type in your questions or your comments. Direct your questions to everyone. And we will ask your questions at the end of the presentation after Kyle is finished. One of the big pluses with this new webinar system is that it allows closed captioning. So this works just like subtitles in a movie. As the speaker talks, the words are printed out on the bottom of the screen. If you wish to access this closed captioning, all you do is go to the CC button at the bottom right of your screen and choose subtitles. And you should see the closed captioning being typed at the bottom of your screen. This presentation will be recorded and made into a YouTube video. We will send you the link to the recording in a day or two, and it will go out to everyone registered and to everyone on our outreach email list. As well, it will be posted on our Friends of Salmon and Friends of Napanee websites, so you can always get it there. Just to mention that if you want to either become a member or do a donation to Friends of the Salmon River, here's the information. You can go online to our website using credit card or PayPal, or you can contact our treasurer if you are somebody who would rather send a check. About the same with Friends of the Napanee River. If you wish to donate or get a membership, same thing, go online. You can use PayPal or a credit card, or you can contact their treasurer. One last mention tonight, before we get on to introducing our speaker, is that there is coming up soon a World Migratory Bird Day. That's on Saturday, May 14th. So, and you can easily look up what's involved there, but basically it's when, of course, many of the migrating birds are coming through. So make sure you have eyes on the sky that day. I would like to introduce our speaker. And I will warn you, Kyle is absolutely nuts about birding. It's his favorite thing to do, and he's a highly adventuresome guy. Kyle Blaney is an avid bird watcher, a nature photographer, and in his regular job, he's a data analyst for SHAD Canada. That's SHAD, and of course you can see it above Kyle's head. It's actually a very cool nonprofit organization that provides hands-on learning experiences for youth, often tuned to the outdoors for students. 9 years ago, Kyle left a very comfy software career to pursue wilderness exploration and engagement with youth. Kyle's a strong believer in citizen science and has contributed over 12,000 images to iNaturalist, an eBird, and he'll be talking about those two programs tonight. His images have been published in Canadian Geographic and in birding magazines in Canada and the US. Kyle's a member of the Quinte Field Naturalist, which many of you are probably familiar with. And Kyle's parents, John and Sharon Blaney, are longtime members of the Quinte Field Naturalists. Many of you tonight may actually know them. With that, we shall now welcome Kyle. Okay, stop sharing.
Thank you, Susan. I'm really happy to be here talking about birds. Like you said, it is definitely one of my #1 passions, and I hope I can get at least a couple people interested in checking out the birds that you can see in your backyard. Let me share my screen and audio, and we can get going. Bear with me. Okay, I'm going to share that screen. Hold on, I didn't share the audio. Let me share that screen one more time. Okay, I think we should be good to go now. I'm Kyle, as Susan mentioned. I work for Shad Canada, and I've had the opportunity to travel all across the country, both for work and for pleasure. But today I'm going to focus on birds that you can find right here in South Central Ontario. The agenda for the talk is going to be that I'm going to talk about why I like birds so much. I've thought a fair bit about why it is that I like birds so much. I will then cover I will then talk about the citizen science programs I use to help me in my pursuit of birds. There are two that I use extensively. I'll then talk about how those programs are used to help me plan birding specific vacations, like one I recently returned from. And then I'll get into showing some of the birds that you can find in your backyard in this part of the world. And I'll talk about what they sound like and what they eat and when you might see them in your backyard. Some of the birds are here only in the winter, others are here only in the summer, and still others are here year-round. There are lots of reasons that I love birds. One of them is that they are everywhere. No matter where you are in Canada, there are birds nearby. From the middle of the biggest city in the country, in downtown Toronto, you can see, occasionally you would see peregrine falcons, you'd see lots of rock pigeons and house sparrows and starlings, all the way to where this picture was taken, which is at the Iqaluit dump in Nunavut in the middle of winter. There aren't a lot of species of birds at the Iqaluit dump in the middle of winter, but there are a lot of individuals. Every bird you see in this picture is of a common raven. But my point is there are birds everywhere all the time. I also like birds because they're right in the Goldilocks zone in terms of the number of species. On a good day in this part of the world, you can see over 100 species of birds. And they can also typically be identified to species without harming the bird. If I were to be a specific type of insect collector, I might actually have to kill the animal to determine what species it is. That's not true for birds. I don't want to harm them, And I'm happy that I can identify lots of them just by looking at them. There are also the main behavior that birds have that I'm fascinated with, and I'm sure has fascinated humans since we've shared the earth with birds, is their ability to fly. That's why we have airplanes, are likely modeled after humans seeing birds in the air. It's a really fascinating behavior that is far from something that we're capable of doing. And not only do they fly, but they migrate from one end of the earth to the other. There are some birds that spend half the year in the Antarctic and half the year in the Arctic. And in the middle, they're zigzagging back and forth between South America and Africa on their way up between those two poles. It's quite remarkable. And I also like birds because they're an indication of the lineage of dinosaurs. They've evolved from dinosaurs. That can be apparent in some of the birds you see. I always think of that when I see a great blue heron. Their legs to me look like they are dinosaur legs, and I can imagine them being around at that time. And then, of course, the most obvious reason to like birds is that they're beautiful. They're beautiful to listen to. They're beautiful to look at. That can range from a very colorful blue jay to something like this, the golden-winged warbler, that's one of the sought-after migrants that comes through in May and would nest in our area. Given that I like birding so much, I've decided that I want to have some goals that are specific to birding. And I recognize that for lots of people that might seem a little odd that I have these birding goals, but it is odd, and I think that's fine. One of my birding goals is that ideally I would be birding all the time. I want to see every kind of bird everywhere in every season. And that's a obviously unreachable goal, but it's really fun trying to meet it. Specific to Canada, my goals related to birding are that I want to look for birds at least once a day. When I'm working, that might be 5 minutes that I spend looking out over the river to see what's flying by and around, as opposed to on a birding vacation where I will be looking for birds from when the sun comes up until the sun comes down for days on end. It can vary quite a bit. I have a specific goal that I want to identify 100 species in every province and territory of Canada. That can be a bit challenging. There are a few places in the country that are difficult to reach, but again, it's fun using this as an excuse to travel around the country and try to identify species. Beyond that, I want to get 50 species in every region of Canada. And according to eBird, which I'll get to shortly, there are 290 regions of Canada. In Ontario, the regions are the same as counties. This means I want to see 50 species in Lennox and Addington County, Hastings County, Northumberland County, Renfrew County. That's the type of region that I'm talking about. In other parts of the country, the regions are set up a little bit differently. And that's a goal I'll almost definitely not ever be able to reach, but it's very fun tracking it. I use 2 citizen science projects to help me figure out where I am in terms of reaching those goals. The 2 programs are iNaturalist, which is was originally started at the University of California. And I also use eBird, which is run by Cornell University's ornithology lab. iNaturalist is a program that lets you share observations on a social network. Each observation includes a few important characteristics. It has the what did you see, when did you see it, where did you see it, and what evidence do you have that you saw that. It works for any living thing, and it's helped me learn a great deal about the natural world. I can photograph something that's, say, a moss or a lichen or a bird or a mammal or whatever, post it to iNaturalist. I initially get help from its artificial intelligence to help me identify what's in the photo. After I decide whether I like the artificial intelligence ID, I can then post it and get humans who then come in and see if they agree with my identification. Here's an example of an iNaturalist observation. You can see here the what is at the top. In this particular case, this is the bird photo that got me interested in birding. I didn't know when this photo was taken that it was a rare bird. Shout out to Brad Hamilton for finding this bird. And then we both photographed it. As it turns out, it's a LeConte's sparrow. You can see the date there. It was taken in May of 2011 during migration. I initially identified it as a LeConte sparrow when I posted the photo, and then 2 or more folks online have confirmed my identification. And there's lots of other ways that you can use iNaturalist. One way that I like to use it is by looking at the map that it will provide, showing you where your sightings are. This is the map of my sightings. As you can see, I've been very fortunate to have traveled extensively throughout North America, but there are still so many gaps that I need to fill in on this map. I've never been to the Torngat Mountains in Labrador. I've never been to James Bay. I've never been to Churchill, Manitoba. I've never been to Inuvik. I've never been to much of the Arctic. It's a great way to see how much there is to explore, even just in our own country. And so that's one way that I use iNaturalist. I use eBird, which is specific to birds. I use it every single day, and it helps me track all sorts of the metrics that I was talking about earlier. For example, this is my eBird homepage, and it tells me, for example, that I have been birding for 335 consecutive days. My goal is that that number will never go back to 0, and eBird it's a good reminder that when I'm sitting at home and working and I realize that it's getting dark or getting close to dark, it's a good indication that I should take a break, go stand out on the deck, see what's there, even if that's just for 5 minutes to see what's flying around near my house. The other thing that eBird helps me do is decide where should I go on my next vacation or my next 10 vacations in the case of how far into the future I plan this type of thing. For example, you get a map in eBird that shows you how many species you've seen in each region of the map. Here's a map of Canada. I live in Ontario and spend lots of time in British Columbia. So those 2 provinces are the reddest on this map, indicating I've seen the most species there. Within Ontario, I'm 1 region away from meeting my goal of at least 50 species in each region. I do not have 50 species in the Kenora district on the Manitoba border. I only have 39 species there. Therefore, it's a good idea to travel there. And the other thing that I can do is help eBird decide what kind of route should I take to get from my home in Belleville to Kenora. Well, according to Google, the obvious route is to take the 401 to Toronto, take the 400 north to Sudbury, and then drive around Lake Superior, and that would take about 21.5 hours of driving. Ontario is a very large province. But I've done that drive a number of times. I've been through all the intermediate regions between Belleville and Kenora. So an alternative is that I could consider driving through Quebec. You can see on my eBird map of Quebec, I have not been to many regions of Quebec at all, let alone spent time there looking for birds. I could, instead of driving along Lake Superior, I could take this route through Val d'Or and Rouyn-Noranda and cross the Ottawa River at around Renfrew or Pembroke and go that way. And that's only an extra 2 hours of driving. I love driving, particularly in Northern Ontario. So this is a great option for me to consider when I'm going to go on my next trip to Kenora. eBird also helps me determine when I get there, what are some possibilities of birds that I could see that would be interesting for me. You can use the eBird target species feature to specify what region you care about in this example, I've said, I want to know what I could see in the Rainy River district. And you can specify at what time of year. Let's say I were to go to Rainy River. In this case, I've configured it as a custom month range of May or June, the focal point of migration. And then I've asked it, what could I see there that I've never seen anywhere in Ontario in my entire life? And then it gives you a list at the bottom. It tells me in this case, there are 26 species that have been seen there or that are somewhat likely, and they order them by frequency. I could potentially see a Western meadowlark. That would be cool. They don't normally come into Ontario. Their range barely comes into Ontario at the Manitoba border. That's great. That's a good thing to be looking for as I'm driving slowly along some of the fields off the Trans-Canada Highway. I could also potentially see Franklin's gull, which is another Western species that barely has its range sneak into Ontario. I'm unlikely, according to eBird, to find an eared grebe, but I know that I can have that information in the back of my head that it's a possibility, however remote, that I could stumble upon one while I'm up there. But what really interests me about this list is that it mentions the Connecticut Warbler, which I've never seen anywhere in the world, not only in Ontario, but I've not seen it anywhere in Canada or anywhere else. And if you click on the map link beside the Connecticut Warbler, it shows you a map of where other people have seen a Connecticut Warbler in that region in the months that I've specified I might be there. All the pins here indicate where someone else has seen them. The larger pins are an eBird hotspot, something like a park or a road that's really good for birding. And that could be indicating that that's exactly where I'll want to be walking or camping or driving while I'm up there. You can see there are two parallel roads here. It's likely the case that someone did some sort of bird survey and stopped every 100 meters and was hearing Connecticut warblers quite frequently. And then you can click on the pin and get a little bit more detail to find out who it was that saw it. You can find out if they had an audio recording that they took at the time, or if they put a comment about their sighting. And I find all of this information is very helpful in just, even if it's just getting into my head somewhere, so this information is there so that I have this database in my head of, if I'm ever in Saskatchewan in February, I should be looking for this type of bird. And if I'm ever in Newfoundland in July, I should be looking for this other type of bird. It's just another interesting way to view the possibilities that exist in Canada. And on this map, this also helped me determine where should I camp when I go to the Kenora and the Rainy River district. As it turns out, there's a provincial park on Caliper Lake that's right near the border of the Kenora district and the Rainy River district. And so that's a perfect place for me to camp, because I can drive 5 minutes north and be birding in the Kenora district, and drive 5 minutes south and be birding in the Rainy River district looking for Connecticut warblers. So that's how I use citizen science, and it not only helps science find out what's going on with the frequency and location of these species, but it helps other people like myself figure out what they might want to do with themselves. It also helps me determine how I'm going to reach for some goals that are very local. I don't get a chance to drive to Kenora every weekend. That would be quite an effort. But I still use eBird to help me decide what I want to do on Saturday. Do I want to drive around Lennox and Addington County and look for a certain type of owl? Or do I want to drive around Prince Edward County and look for some unusual geese that have been seen near Wellington? Or do I want to drive north of Hastings and look for pine grosbeaks that have been showing up at a feeder in the Hastings Highlands? My local birding goals are a bit more harder to reach because I'm here birding more frequently. I want to see 200 species in every county that is anywhere near Hastings County. I'm not yet at 200 in Lennox and Addington. I should be able to reach that this year. I want to get 100 in counties that are a little bit further away, like Frontenac County. And I want to, because I live in Hastings, I want to not only see 200 species in Hastings, but to photograph over 200 species in Hastings. And I'm getting somewhat close to that goal as well. All in all, these citizen science projects are wonderful. They're free. I encourage you to try them out, and they really help science as well. Now I want to move on to the title of the talk and discuss some of the backyard birds that you can find right around the Salmon River and the Napanee River and the other places close by. And I'll do so in taxonomic order. I'll start with doves. For example, this is the most familiar dove at feeders, likely. It's a mourning dove. On each of these species pages, I'll have the species name at the top. I'll have the when it occurs in the bottom left corner. In the case of mourning doves, they're here year round. And then in the bottom right corner, I will have what it is that they like to eat. And then I will play the sound of each, and I'll talk about what I think about when I hear these sounds. You can hear the mourning dove is called the mourning dove spelled M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G because it's sounding like it's sad, as opposed to a mourning dove that's not there in the afternoon. Related to mourning doves, and sometimes a bit of a pest at feeders, if you get lots of them, mourning doves can be pests at feeders as well. They can come in large numbers. But you have rock pigeons, which are not a native species to this part of the world, but they've been introduced here and have done very well and have taken over lots of cityscapes. In Belleville, there are some that get occasionally consumed by the peregrine falcon that will hang out on the Belleville Courthouse at the corner of Coleman Street and Bridge Street, for those of you that want to take a look for that. Beyond doves, there are several species of woodpeckers that could show up at trees in your backyard, ranging from the smallest woodpecker, which is a downy woodpecker. It looks very similar to the next species. You'll see the hairy woodpecker. It's smaller. It has a much smaller bill. And I think it sounds smaller as well. And I'll play that for you now. So the downy woodpecker sounds small, and the bird that's very much related to it but has a much larger bill, the hairy woodpecker, sounds bigger. That's just how I think of it anyway. I still think in the field it can be challenging for me to identify which of those two I'm hearing. But maybe I'm getting a little better year over year at distinguishing between the two. Still a woodpecker, but not looking anything like the last two, and more likely to appear on the ground is a northern flicker. And they have quite a persistent call that can sound a lot like a pileated woodpecker, which I'll get to shortly. This is a northern flicker. And then another type of woodpecker is a sapsucker. Around here, we only have one kind of sapsucker, a yellow-bellied sapsucker. And they sound very whiny. Maybe they're complaining they got the name sapsucker. I'm not sure. The largest species of woodpecker in North America, unfortunately, there was a larger species of woodpecker, the ivory-billed woodpecker, which became extinct in the 20th century, likely. Some people still claim that there are a few lingering individuals in Cuba or the swamps of the southeastern United States, but it's quite likely an extinct species. Anyway, the pileated is the largest woodpecker. They will occasionally come to trees in your backyard, or sometimes maybe even occasionally to a suet feeder. and they sound a little bit like the flicker. And they can be very loud, and that sound can carry a great distance if you're in the forest. I'll play it one more time. So keep a listen while you're walking in the woods for that. Beyond that, we have corvids, the blue jays and crows. Blue jays are probably one of the most colorful species that you can get in the backyard. I think that all corvids sound to some degree or another at least a little bit angry at all times. You can see if you agree when you hear the blue jay. That's a recording of just one blue jay. Sometimes you'll hear many blue jays that will crowd another individual and try to get a bird like an owl or a hawk to leave their territory. And so hearing a bunch of angry blue jays can be a good indication that you should pay attention to what's in the nearby trees, and there could be an owl or something hiding and trying to sleep away the day while the blue jays are harassing it. Related to a blue jay and not likely to come to a feeder if you're anywhere close to, say, Highway 401, but definitely around in the northern parts of our region, is a Canada jay. It used to be called a gray jay. Some people call it a whiskey jack. These are very gregarious birds. They will sometimes eat right out of your hand. They're a bird that lots of people go up to Algonquin to see in the winter. They can be along Opiongo Road or on the Spruce Bog Boardwalk Trail. And they are quite an interesting bird in that they are the longest running bird study in the world. They've been studied in Algonquin for, I think, probably 40 plus years now, 40, maybe even 50 years. And so we have a lot of data on how climate change has been impacting their ability to survive throughout the winter. They're a very hardy bird as well, being able to live in Algonquin during the winter. Then you have the crows and the ravens, very, very dark black birds. They can appear superficially similar, but a crow has a bill attached to its head, and a raven has a head attached to an absolutely gigantic bill. And of course, they sound quite differently. So everyone's familiar with the sound of a crow. Oh, I didn't mean to advance the slide there. Let me play the crow. Crows say caw, 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 caw. And then ravens say all kinds of stuff, including very weird noises. They can be yelly or just loud and weird and gurgling and croaking, all possibilities. And you can see here on this profile of a raven, the bill is just as big as the head. It's really nothing but a bill. At least that's the way I think of it. Much smaller than the crows and ravens are chickadees, the ubiquitous bird that you see whenever you go out to really anywhere near where humans are. They like to be fed by hand. The one that we see around here almost always has a black hat and is called a black-capped chickadee. And they are called chickadees because they say their name when they're singing. So chickadee-dee-dee-dee. And lots of other species like to hang out with chickadees. So if you're ever at a place and there are 5 or 10 chickadees around you, there might be other species kind of lingering. There could be kinglets with the chickadees, or there could be nuthatches, or in the case of migration, you could get a stray warbler. It's a good opportunity to just look for that maybe slightly weird bird that could be hanging around. There is one other kind of chickadee that occurs in our area, but again, only in the more northerly parts of our region. And it has a brown hat instead of a black hat, and it's called a Boreal Chickadee. Also sounds a little bit different. But you should keep your eye out. You never know when one could show up. Weird birds show up at feeders all the time. So even in Belleville or Napanee or Kingston, you could get one of these showing up. Somewhat related are the nuthatches. There are two kinds of nuthatches. The white-breasted, which they sound similar, but the white-breasted again sounds a little bit larger and bigger, I think. And then the red-breasted is much more nasally. And they can be also hanging out together, and you could sometimes see them very close together. In terms of thrushes, the thrush that I've noticed around a lot more just in the last week, it's not necessarily an indicator that spring is starting like it has been known for historically, but lots of them hang around all winter. Sometimes around here you can find pretty significant flocks of up to 50 or more, and they have a beautiful sound that you hear all the time in the spring. And then the other kind of thrush that you could get lucky enough to have, especially if you live in a more rural location and you put out bluebird boxes, is an eastern bluebird. Not likely to show up at a feeder in the city, but still can be, is around. And again, I don't know why, but I've seen way more of these this winter than in previous winters. Then you get birds that can be quite problematic. They can appear in enormous flocks, especially birds like the starling. The starling is another bird that's not native to North America. In the early 1800s, there would have been 0 starlings in North America. And then in the late 1800s, around 100 were released into Central Park in New York. And little did the person releasing them know that in 2022, there would be likely at least 100 million of them in North America, and possibly several times that. I'm not sure exactly what the estimate is for them. They are actually quite a beautiful bird, despite being somewhat problematic. And the immatures can be confusing for new birders, including myself, when I first saw one and was thinking it was some sort of weird looking sparrow or warbler or something like that. They can also mimic the sounds of other birds. So if you're listening to a flock of starlings and you think you hear a kind of a weird blue jay or something, it could be that it's an actual starling that's mimicking the call of a blue jay. Another bird that can be quite beautiful if you get it in the right light, it can have a very bright head, is the grackle. It also has a really long tail and a cool yellow eye, and also makes some quite interesting sounds. To me, they sound like they're dealing with a type of electrical problem and not sure how to deal with it. And then kind of a similar sound. Some people don't like brown-headed cowbirds because their nesting strategy is to lay their eggs in the nests of other species of birds and then just take off and let the other species take care and raise their young. It's not their fault. That's how they evolved. It's actually quite an effective strategy, but it can be a little disconcerting to witness a young cowbird that's quite a bit larger, for example, than a yellow warbler, that's trying to feed it and is unaware that it's not related to this cowbird. But it's at least an interesting strategy. And the sounds they make can range from somewhat electrical as well, or almost sounding like water droplets. I'll play that one more time. You can hear that. They can be very close by, and the only way that you'll notice is by hearing that slightly odd sound. You've got red-winged blackbirds. They're going to be around all the time at marshes in the summer and can be very loud and can start attacking you. If you're playing on a golf course or something and there are red-winged blackbirds that are nesting nearby, they can bombard you and attack you and try to make you go away. Some people think of their sound as conqueree, and then you can hear that all the time. You might be surprised that a Baltimore Oriole is actually also a type of blackbird, despite being more orange than black. You can see, though, it does share the bill shape of a red-winged blackbird, very, very pointy. And they also have a beautiful song. And then we get into sparrows, which can be hard to tell apart, but with some experience and by learning the sounds, I would consider myself just starting to learn how to tell sparrows apart. The most common sparrow over the summer is a song sparrow, and it starts out with 3 notes that are the same, and then I think it likes to just sort of improvise. It's like a jazz player that starts with a beat and then goes crazy. Anyway, maybe not a good analogy, but that's what I think of when I hear it. Tree sparrows only come here in the winter. This is the southern part of their range. For lots of birds that we see, we're in the northern part of their range. That's not the case for tree sparrow. And they're known for having a 2-colored bill, yellow on the bottom and gray on the top, as well as a little dot of gray at the front of their chest. And they sound like this. And then you've got the aptly named white-throated sparrow because of its white throat. Not all birds are named as well as that. And this is a very famous song, especially in the Canadian North Woods. You probably have heard it. Some people think it's saying Old Sam Peabody, 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 or O Canada. Similar name, but not really looking that similar as the previous species as a white-crowned sparrow. Very nice contrasting black and white striped head and a really clean-looking breast. This is a very bulky, large warbler. Also a recognizable song. Also looking like a tree sparrow a little bit with his red head, but not a tree sparrow, is a chipping sparrow. And it's got a black eye line and a cleaner breast, doesn't have the dot on the front, and it sounds quite different. Like a very nice machine gun. A very, very calm, repeated note. And then the largest sparrow that we have is the eastern Towie. It can say its name. It will sometimes say Towie, or it can also say what some people remember as drink your tea. And that's the sound I'm playing here. Not sure how much you think that sounds like drink your tea, but that's what it is. And then a junco, which can sound quite a bit like a chipping sparrow in the same sort of realm of machine gun sounding birds. A little bit different, but still repeated trilling notes. And then we have another invasive species. It's not related to the sparrows that I showed you. This is actually a European species, used to be called the English sparrow. And they hang out around barns. They nest actually in my neighbor's house in their hedgerow. And if you hear one of them, you normally hear a bunch. And the females, in this case, the females on the left, it looks quite a bit different than the males. And then we have finches that are toward the end of the taxonomic list of birds. Finches all somewhat sound the same, ranging from a goldfinch. I'll play a goldfinch. It's kind of that squeaky, droning on and on kind of sound. And you have a house finch here. This is a picture of a female house finch. You can distinguish it from a purple finch because it doesn't have quite as much of a white line above its eye. So it sounds similar to the goldfinch. Birders might say that if they hear something that sounds a little finchy. And then the purple finch here, you can see does have a more of a white eyebrow. Also sounds finchy. And then a cool bird to hear among the finches is a pine siskin. You're not likely to see them in the southern part of our region. Again, this photo was taken in Algonquin Park. It's a good bird to see at the feeders up there if you go in the winter. They have a really subtle yellow on their wings, and they can be quite high pitched and say zree, zree. Similar thing too, you're not likely to only hear one of them. You're likely to hear them in a flock. That concludes the normal birds that you might see. I did want to finish off with some surprise birds. One of the great things about birding is that you really never know what you're going to encounter, ranging from that LeConte sparrow that my friend and I stumbled upon with complete dumb luck 10 years ago, to birds that might just show up on your roof or on your feeders or in your trees. That can range from owls, like this barred owl, or you might even get really lucky and have a great gray owl come to your feeders or into your yard. Behind my house, a couple times a year, there's a hawk that will come around, like this Cooper's hawk. There are now bald eagles in the area. They might stop by, and just if you have a tree that's somewhere near the river, the eagle might come and hang out at the top of it. Or in the case of at my parents' backyard feeder a number of years ago, over the Christmas holidays, for some reason, there was a Cape May Warbler, which is a bird that's supposed to be migrating. It's only supposed to be in Ontario from May to September, maybe into October, but it was there on December 25th, 26th, 27th. Perfect example that you really never know what you're going to see, even in your own backyard. I want to conclude by just hoping that you can take some actions to help the birds. There are some simple steps you can take. Naturalize your property. If you're going to plant a new tree, plant a tree that's a native species rather than one that's an invasive species. Take a look for birds. It helps when you report rare birds to someone. It helps when you photograph them and let people know that they're around. If it's an owl, you might want to keep it more quiet so that you're respecting the individual bird. Try out the citizen science projects. I mentioned eBird and iNaturalist. There's another one I wanted to briefly mention, which is called Merlin. With Merlin, it will identify the sounds of birds in real time as you're in the field. You can put your phone's microphone in the air and have it listen to birds, and it will display on the screen guesses for what it thinks it's hearing. The technology is pretty new, but it's remarkably accurate already. And I can only imagine in the next 10 or 20 years, it will be absolutely spectacular. So that concludes my formal presentation. I really appreciate everybody for coming. And I wanted to thank Susan, Steve, and Lawrence for setting everything up. It went really, really smoothly. And I appreciate all of the work that you did. We'll have a Q&A in a few moments, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Thanks again.
There you go. I finally got some sound back, Kyle, and I took me a while to get it back again. I don't know where to start. Many thanks, Kyle. You're clearly passionate about birds and how they enhance our and others' lives. I guess judging by the numbers, we're around 260 people. Yours was a very popular topic. you certainly explored a lot of the capabilities of iNaturalist, Merlin, and more specifically eBird. I know I've been using eBird and iNaturalist for a while now, a few years, and I have not used near the capabilities that you described in eBird. So thanks for that. We appreciate your sharing your vast knowledge and experiences across Canada, and especially your goals. I think you've got a lot of travel in your future, judging by the map that you showed us. You certainly helped to launch us in the spring. Now all we need, I guess, is for spring to arrive and to once again experience some migratory birds. So I'll hand back to Susan, but one request I have for the Q&A session is perhaps you could give us a quick summary of the great work being done for youth by Shad Canada. Over to you, Susan.
Hello there. I'm just going to give a real brief update for everybody on our next event after this on, oh, I need the slide up too. It's the last slide. I need the, our next event will actually be on Tuesday, April 5, and we are going, in a sense, it follows very nicely on Kyle's presentation because it will feature the executive director of FLAP Canada. FLAP being the, let's get the slide up here. We will be learning, there we go, there's our poster for the next event. FLAP, of course, stands for the Fatal Light Awareness Program. If you haven't heard of it before, the executive director will be speaking about the excessive number of bird strikes all across Canada, especially, of course, on very tall glass buildings, which is always a problem. And also we'll talk a lot about how we can prevent birds from hitting our windows. So it will be directed to residential people like ourselves as well. So that's Tuesday, April 5. And of course, closer to the time, we will send you lots more information about that. Now we will get on to the question and answer session. Stephen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Moore. Hey, Kyle. That was great, of course. Why don't you start out just by talking about Shad a little bit, and then we'll get on to some questions.
You have to unmute. There.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, Shad is an organization that's been around for over 40 years. Our main program that we run is a summer program for grade 10 and 11 students. They get to live at a Canadian university for the entire month of July. We have 18 campuses hosting the program this year, all the way from University of British Columbia on the West Coast to Memorial University on the East Coast. We take about 50 or 60 students to each campus, a total of over 1,000 students per year. They get to meet like-minded peers from all across the country from very different backgrounds and learn about science, technology, engineering, arts, math in a very hands-on way that's quite a bit different than high school. It's a program that I was lucky enough to do when I was in high school, and it opened my eyes to a lot of things, and it ultimately got me into computer science, which became my major and my career for 17 years after I graduated. I owe the program a great deal, and now I'm very proud to work for them as analyzing data and providing input into how they make decisions on all sorts of things.
Oh, that's very cool. Do you have a website that people could go to?
Yeah, I have. My personal website is just my name, kyleblaney.com. And it has a list there of upcoming presentations, as well as some information on my previous life as a software developer, but mostly it's now about canoe trips and why I like staying in a tent as opposed to a hotel and that kind of stuff. And then my photos are on kyleblaneyphoto.com.
Very good. I've contributed quite a few photographs to iNaturalist, especially when we have been in the Dominican a couple of times. There are some very cool birds down there. I didn't know about the capability of eBird. For somebody starting out, would it be worthwhile for them to go to eBird and pick their own location, and maybe now, whatever time it is, and see what they might see around their own home?
Oh yeah, there are lots of features in eBird that you can use once you've created an account. You can do target species by region, by month. You could say, what species would I see if I went to Cuba or Dominican Republic or Prince Edward Island or Northwest Territories, wherever you're planning to visit. It's a good way to figure out what you might see. There are features that let you explore species maps. If you're looking specifically wondering, where are we in the range of an American tree sparrow, you could find the range map of that exact species and find out that we're in the southern part of the range, as opposed to Magnolia Warbler, where we're in the northern part of its range.
Now, some of the questions that came in, someone said that they thought they saw a pileated in Costa Rica. Might that be the smaller Hispaniolan woodpecker, or I guess any bird could show up anywhere, couldn't it?
Well, yes, lots of people, when they see a weird bird, they remind people that they can fly. And there's that very famous Steller sea eagle that they've confirmed that the same individual eagle that's supposed to be in Asia has shown up this year, both in Alaska and Maine. So they can get around. I don't know anything about South American birds, so I don't even know what a Hispaniola woodpecker looks like. But of course, I'm intrigued and want to see one now.
Oh yeah,
So,
they're neat.
I couldn't tell you I don't know how far south the range of a pileated. I can check on my phone to see what the range map is of a pileated woodpecker, to see how far south they go. That's another thing that you can do. There's lots of negatives of having phones everywhere, but it's great for birding when you travel, that I can have a whole field guide just in my hand. Well, my app for pileated woodpeckers only shows North America. So I can tell you they go to the extreme south of Florida. So it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to think they're further south than that.
Right. Yep. If and I really liked when you said it really is a slow process. It's year after year after year that, at least for me, I've learned a few sounds and, I've been able to identify, and it's probably worthwhile not to be impatient, that it does take a while to learn, eh?
Oh, yes. In my family, I would be the fourth best birder, likely. And I didn't do much birding between the ages of 15 and 40. So I have that 25-year gap that I will never recover from. And it can be, I kind of like that it can be a very frustrating hobby, because you'll always find people there are people that are quite a bit younger than me that will always and forever be better bird watchers than me, because they've done it, they've done it their whole life. But so I like that sort of unattainable goal that I'll never be able to reach, but it's always something to strive for. And you can always get better as long as you compare yourself to you last year as opposed to other people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Our daughter is a field biologist, and it is very cool to go out with her because, man, she knows the names of everything.
Yes.
On the ground, in the air. And it's really quite an education. It's very cool.
Yeah, my brother has taken the same approach. He's a botanist in the Maritimes, and yes, I have the same view when I'm out with him, and it's very interesting to know everything about everything.
No
I know some things about some things as opposed to everything about everything.
Do you have any recommendations for someone just starting out? I want to attract birds to my backyard. You talked about naturalization, and we saw another presentation on caterpillars and how many caterpillars are required to feed a brood of birds. It was astonishing.
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain plants you can plant to attract those caterpillars, which will attract particular birds. But should someone, just buy a feeder and hang it up somewhere and put some feed in it and see what happens? Or
That's certainly the cheapest way to start, is to just, to start being a bird watcher, really all you need is binoculars. If you want to start attracting them to your house, yeah, the steps of naturalizing can be a multi-year process or multi-decade process, depending on the scale that you want to reach. It never hurts to just put out a feeder and see what you can attract. You could start with just a hummingbird feeder and see if you can attract, have a bit of a celebration when the first hummingbird comes, or you could put out seed on the ground on the snow behind your house, and eventually see if some sparrows or starlings or something would come and enjoy it. It can be relatively simple to get started.
Someone says we have a bird in Gananoque that sounds like pita, pita, pita. Any idea what it might be? I assume it's not calling for a sandwich, but is there any idea what I know birding by, there are books. There's a book and a recording called Birding by Ear.
Yeah, I have I've read the field guide to the bird sounds of North America. There have been a number of approaches to how you communicate. The English language is a terrible way to describe bird sounds. I can't think of what that bird would be in Gananoque, unfortunately.
Now, what occurs to me just now is that Peter, Peter, Peter is a cardinal. And so it could be because cardinals make many different sounds, and I'm hearing them a lot right now because I think they're trying to find mates. And
okay. Yeah, I guess we'd need to know a little bit more about what type of habitat, whether is it in the forest, or is it in beach, or is it, that might help, but just based on that description, unfortunately, I don't have any further guesses.
Now here we're in a semi-residential area, and there are cardinals very high in the trees. They like to be right up there, I guess. So also one thing that I found useful in terms of birding books, and I'd like your comment on that, is I started out with this one, Birds of Ontario, which might be looking backward there. I don't know. No, it's a very simple book, and it just has the most likely birds that you're going to see in Ontario. And that was a very good start because I didn't have to thumb through 500 pages looking at pictures. And then finally, our daughter gave us Sibley's Birds East, which sort of the next step up.
It also depends on, so I have the Sibley's here. Again, I put it in front of me.
Oh yeah, yours is right side round. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sibley's is good. There are a number of new approaches to field guides. Some people prefer looking at actual photographs of birds as opposed to Sibley, which is David Sibley drawing every single individual bird and all the different variations of juveniles and males and females and age differences. It can be a personal preference which type of one you prefer. There's the Stokes field guide with it as photos. I'm actually not familiar with that first book that you showed, but the first thing you have to do as a bird watcher is become really, really familiar with the very, very common species. Then you start branching out into, that's a little bit different. That's similar to this. That's similar to a blue jay, but it's gray. That's similar to a X, but it's different in Y. And then that way you can branch out. So you first need to understand the bird families there are. You need to distinguish between a duck and a gull. And then beyond that, you need to understand, to tell ducks apart, I should be looking at these features, and to tell gulls apart, I should be looking at eye color, leg color, wingtip color, size. So yeah, it helps to narrow it down. I like the idea of starting with a book that's very specific to your region and very specific to what's really, really common.
Yeah. Now, also someone is just saying we saw our first turkey vulture in Campbellford. Someone else says they are seeing turkey vultures and they're worried.
Well, as long as they're walking around and moving, it's good to see a turkey vulture. I'm expecting to see turkey vultures over my house sometime in March. I know they've been reported in the area, and some of them will even stick around in Prince Edward County throughout the winter. There's one part of Sandbanks Provincial Park that became a bit notorious for a bunch of them hanging out near the lake over the winter.
Mhm.
So they're a cool species in and of itself, the way they help clean things up, and they don't have feathers on their head, so they don't get stuck on carcass meat that they're
You're right. Yeah.
scavenging.
Yeah,
They're pretty cool.
I'll just close this part by saying again, thanks a lot, Kyle, for all of this. And I also want to thank people in the chat, because there were a number of people that had technical questions. How do I change the size of my captions, or what do I do with my sound? And before I could answer, someone else who was on the call answered them. And it was very helpful. I thought that people were helping each other out through the chat. And so thank you to all of you who have actually participated and helped make this a good event. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for coming, and again, to thank Kyle for all the time that he obviously took to put all this together. It was just a wonderful, great big run through of how we can connect so much better with the world of birds. And I know for myself, boy, I'm kind of anxious to get out there and do some bigger, wider birding trips, especially after seeing all the tools that you use. It just enlarges the whole the possibilities so much. So thanks so much for everything that you taught us tonight, Kyle. It was really excellent. And oh, I did want to mention too, we had some here at our place, we had a lot of fun watching a red-bellied woodpecker for the first time this year.
Great.
That was a very exciting bird to see.
Yeah,
And
that's an example of they're moving north, and 20 years ago, it would have been very rare for you to have one at your feeders, but they're becoming a little bit more common, presumably because it's getting warmer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very exciting. And of course, that's the other thing that people are obviously looking at too, is that, with the changing climate, now people are seeing birds that perhaps we would not have ever seen before, or were further south and now are coming north. So it's, always interesting to see how all that changes so much.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. We had a lot of people on tonight, so it's just exciting to see that so many people are interested in the world of birds, and interested in just expanding their own knowledge and the kind of tools that they can work with. And hopefully lots of people will go away from this wanting to contribute more to citizen science.
Mhm.
So thanks so much, everybody, for coming. And if you're interested in our next event, it will be on April 5, and we shall see you next time.
Good birding.
Good birding. Okay.